What sounds like fiction but is actually a real historical event. A Chinese emperor once ran in circles around a pillar to escape an assassin. He survived. Some guy in Australia decided he wanted to hunt rabbits, but rabbits don't live in Australia, so then he released like 12 in his backyard, and now there's a fuck ton of rabbits in Australia. The Glasgow Ice Cream Wars: 6 people died in a turf war over ice cream van routes. They were dealing heroin out of the vans. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of 2 joining thunderstorms and lifted to an altitude of 10 kilometers. She landed 3.5 hours later about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning and lack of oxygen. In the 1800s there were street vendors in Egypt who sold ancient Egyptian mummies. Just lined them up on a street corner and sold them like they were umbrellas on a rainy day. English tourists would buy them to display as oddities. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first-place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out, and got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes, and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second-place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water, and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it. So he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans, and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note: these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had 1 water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, lead to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week late, because they were still using the Julian calendar. In 1904. Seriously. This needs to be a movie. If this sounds familiar, I'm reposting myself. A town in France nearly danced itself to death in 1518 because of a dancing plague. The longest piano piece of any kind is Vexations by Erik Satie. It consists of a 180-note composition which, on the composer's orders, must be repeated 840 times so that the whole performance is 18 hours 40 minutes. Its first reported public performance in September 1963, in the Pocket Theater, New York City, required a relay team of 10 pianists. The New York Times critic fell asleep at 4 a.m., and the audience dwindled to 6 masochists. At the conclusion, one sadomasochist shouted, "Encore!" Jack, a baboon who was employed to change rail signals. After initial skepticism, the railway decided to officially employ Jack once his job competency was verified. The baboon was paid 20 cents a day, and a half bottle of beer each week. It is widely reported that in his 9 years of employment with the railroad, Jack never made a mistake. The Great Stink of London in 1858. One summer the heat dried up the River Thames, where all the human waste went, and an unbearable smell pervaded throughout the entire city. All Parliament representatives were eventually coerced out of their homes outside of London to convene and solve the issue. Much to the citizens' glee, Parliament was held in their building on the bank of the River Thames, resulting in one of the fastest Parliament decisions ever made to reform the London sewer system. Edit. Grammar. Return of Napoleon. An army was sent to intercept him, and they ended up fighting for him. If it were shown in a movie, most people would have considered it cheesy and unrealistic. The rise and fall of Alexander the Great. never lost a battle in his life, conquered the whole known world, and only stopped because his soldiers were tired. The town of Rothenburg ob der Tauber in Germany, one of the country's oldest and most preserved cities. Essentially during the 30 Years' War, the Catholic army wanted to destroy the town because they resisted the church. Count von Tilly, sounds like a Monty Python name, was going to destroy the town. But as a gesture of peace the town offered him a mass, 3.25 L, of local wine. He declared that if anyone in the town could drink the mass of wine in one go, he would spare the town and move on. Then someone just walked up and did it. So the army left. Much later during World War II, when the US was performing air raids, someone in the White House knew of this town and pleaded that we do not destroy it. So it has been saved from 2 wars, all because one guy chugged a bunch of wine. Edit. Apparently there was some damage done in World War II, but I don't know if it was bombed. It's also not one of the oldest cities but one of the most preserved. I just posted from memory from my German culture and history class in college. Thanks for the feedback. The entire Taiping Rebellion. A war started by a Chinese peasant who dreamed, and believed, he was Jesus' younger brother. Although poor, the first thing he did was have a giant demon-slaying sword forged. Took over a city. Asked the British why they wouldn't pay him tribute as the new head of their faith. Engaged in total war with the Qing. Applied Sejua communist policies like abolishing private property. Separated women and men from ever interacting. And sent the women to the front lines. Over 20 million people died. With some estimates as high as 40 million. It was the 4th deadliest conflict in human history. It killed more people than World War I. Only World War II, transition of the Ming, and Qing conquest of the Ming were deadlier. During World War II the Polish army conscripted a bear. Wikipedia. During World War I, the Germans sent Lenin back to Russia in a sealed train, calling him the most dangerous weapon that they had. A Finnish soldier, who managed to escape capture after losing his squad in a meth-up hallucination. Being the doctor of the group, he was carrying the meth pills for the whole squad. And in order to survive and escape his pursuers he took the whole pill box. 30 pills. When the allowed dosage for a grown man was 1. He survived in the Soviet wilderness for 2 weeks eating only pine buds and one time a Siberian jay that he caught and ate raw. When he was rescued he was 45 kilograms and had a resting heart rate of 200 BPM. Edit. Historical accuracy. Please read Akula_s reply. Serial killer Karl Panzram broke into the home of former President William H. Taft and stole jewelry, bonds, and a gun. With the money he got from the first 2 he bought a yacht in which he used the gun to kill a bunch of sailors. The story of the Great Boston Molasses Flood sounds like it would be right at home and seen in a bad Adam Sandler flick. The fire in Dublin, Ireland on June 18, 1875. A fire broke out and spread to a malthouse and the heat broke open every alcohol barrel and flooded the streets with it. The people of Dublin decides to drink the burning alcohol that is spreading in the streets. Filled with litter and debris and was literally on fire. 13 people died not from the fire or smoke but from alcohol poisoning they got from drinking the street whiskey. The Second Punic War has all the makings of a great story. It has a blood oath, an underdog story, bravery, an main character, tragedy and a final showdown between the 2 main characters. The fact that it all, or most of it, happened blows my mind. There could be a godlike series about the 3 wars. In 496 BC the army of King Gujian of Yu put 3 ranks of criminals in the front of their battle formation. Their task was to impress the enemy with their ferocity and commitment by chopping off their own heads as soon as battle was joined. The tactic was a success. While their opponents from the state of Wu were recovering from their astonishment they were overrun by the rest of the Yu army. The convicts, who were condemned men anyway, had been coerced by the threat that if they didn't comply with this plan their families would be executed also. Stephen Fry on Chi. I think cutting off one's own head is pretty unlikely. But they might have slit their own throats. During the First World War, navies from different countries hired artists to paint crazy patterns on their ships in order to throw off the aim of enemy U-boats. Source: Vesna Vulovic fell from a height of 10,160 meters and lived. She holds the world record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. The Japanese kamikaze, Divine Wind, that saved the country from an amphibious invasion by the Mongolian hordes. The Mongols captured a foothold on some outlying Japanese islands and started to attack the mainland. The Japanese army pushed them back, and they had to retreat to China. When they did, a typhoon ravaged their navy and sank their ships. The Mongolians, probably reasonably, seeing this as a fluke, decided to rebuild and attack again. 7 years later, unfortunately for them, the Japanese fortified their coastline. After basically months of sailing around seeking a place to land, another typhoon struck their fleet and destroyed them. There would be no third invasion. The life of Lamapin. And GT. She earned her living through singing and dueling demonstrations. Usually dressed as a man, a fashion she'd keep with for the rest of her life. She was already so skilled with the sword at this point in her life, quickly surpassing her new lover, that audiences sometimes would not believe that she was actually a woman. In fact, when one drunken onlooker proclaimed loudly that she was actually a man, she tore off her shirt, providing him ample evidence to the contrary. The heckler had no comeback. And GT. If Lamapin had one overriding flaw, it was an allergy to boredom. In fact, she soon dumped the wandering swordsman, pronounced herself tired of men in general, and seduced a local merchant's daughter. The merchant, desperate to separate the two, sent his daughter to a convent, but again, our heroine found a loophole. Lamapin joined the convent herself, and started hooking up with her intended in the house of God. Shortly into their convent stay, an elderly nun died, from unrelated causes, it would seem, and Lamapin reacted the same way anyone might, by disinterring the body, putting it in her lover's room, and setting the whole convent on fire. /opening square bracket .. And GT. Her behavior amped up even more when she became an opera singer, basically the rock stars of the day. In true theater major fashion, she alternately fucked and fought her way through her stage contemporaries. And audiences loved her for it. 3 stories of her time in Paris. And GT. 1. I. Alone. Have architected your ass beating. Another opera singer named Dumanil started talking shit about a number of women, including Lamapin. She responded by ambushing him, pushing a sword in his face, and demanding a duel. When he refused, on the grounds that he was a wimp, she beat him with a cane, stealing his snuffbox and watch. The next day, she caught him complaining that he had been assaulted by a gang of thieves. She called him a liar and a coward, threw his watch and snuffbox at him, and declared that she, alone, had architected his ass beating. And GT. 2. One night, while out carousing on the town, a particularly ardent man named Dalbert began crudely hitting on her. She'd just finished singing for the crowd, and he let loose with the one-liner, "I've listened to your chirping, but now tell me of your plumage," a cum on which I take to be the 17th century version of, "Does the carpet match the drapes?" She was, shall we say, unimpressed. In short order, she got into a fight with him and 2 of his buddies, won, and ran her sword clean through his shoulder. She felt a bit bad about that, so she visited her impaled victim in the hospital and hooked up with him anyway. Although the relationship only lasted a short while, they were apparently lifelong friends. And GT. 3. She attended a royal ball, thrown either by Louis XIV or his brother, dressed as a man. She spent most of the evening courting a young woman, which earned the ire of 3 of the woman's suitors. When Lamapin pushed things too far and kissed the young lady in full view of everyone, the 3 challenged her to a duel. She fought all of them, outside of the royal palace, mind you, and won. According to some accounts, she actually killed them. This entertained Louis XIV so much that he pardoned her from any punishment. During World War I, Christmas 1914, the British and German forces on the Western Front unofficially made a ceasefire without the authorization of their superiors in order to celebrate, trade goods, and play football. Also during World War I, the Russian and German armies in Poland stopped fighting each other in order to fight off an enormous pack of wolves that had been attacking both armies. In 1967, Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt simply vanished without a trace and no one knew what happened for 40 years. In 1956, a man named Tommy Fitzpatrick stole a small plane from New Jersey for a bet and then landed it perfectly on the narrow street in front of the bar he had been drinking at in Manhattan. 2 years later, he did it again after someone didn't believe he had done it the first time. Here is an article about it. Ted Bundy escaped from custody twice. The first by jumping out of a 3-story building. Second time by taking a guard's outfit and walking out the front door. A tornado helped the U.S. in the War of 1812 during the Battle of D.C. A freak patch of dense fog saved the colonies during the Revolutionary War. There was one person who survived the sinking of not only the Titanic, but also the Titanic's 2 sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. Okay, not a big fan of editing comments. But I'm going to because this got bigger than expected. Said person as Violet Jessop, and the Titanic and Britannic were indeed sunk. And the Olympic collided with a British warship but did not sink. The many defenestrations of Prague. Starting a war by throwing diplomats out the window is almost straight out of 300. Paddy Roy Bates, the founding king of Sealand, had his country, a small naval platform, invaded and his son Michael taken hostage by Dutch and German mercenaries. They came in riding jet skis, speedboats, and helicopters while he was in England buying groceries. He hired a helicopter, came down a rope with a shotgun, reconquered Sealand and took the mercenaries hostage. An official German diplomat was sent to negotiate the release of the ringleader. The Emu War. When Australia went to war with emus. The London beer flood of 1814, when one vat of beer at Mew & Co. brewery exploded. It proceeded to cause a domino effect of other vats to also burst, causing a tidal wave that flooded a neighborhood, leaving crumbled homes in its path as well as 8 people dead, and dozens injured. Operation Paul Bunyan. To summarize, some Americans were killed by the North Korean military while cutting down a tree in the Korean DMZ. In response to this, to show the North Koreans that you don't fuck with the United States, America went back to finish cutting down the tree with a little bit of backup firepower to help keep them safe. Specifically, America and South Korea sent a convoy of 23 vehicles and about 140 men, armed with rifles, grenade launcher, vehicle-mounted chain guns, chainsaws, some with suicide vests, some with axes and Taekwondo training. They had 27 helicopters circling behind them, 7 of which were attack helicopters. They had B-52s flying overhead, escorted or accompanied by F-4s, F-5s, F-86s, and F-111s, all of which were armed and ready to engage. They moved a carrier offshore, just behind the border. They had full infantry, artillery, and armor divisions standing by. All this, just to chop down a tree, carrot, and to send a message. Of course. First Iraq War. When Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, Iraqi information minister under Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, was saying everything was fine and the coalition was losing, while American gunfire, maybe even tanks, in the background during a live CNN interview. Edit. Looks like this was the second Iraq War. Everyone. Sorry for brain fart. But this brain fart is far less intense than someone claiming Iraq was winning as M16s and M1A1s are within earshot during your interview in your capital. Patton in World War II in charge of a decoy blow-up army division. In 1504, a German imperial knight lost his hand to a cannon shot which forced his sword against him. He lived. Pretty amazing for that time. And instead of, stopping with fighting and living the rest of his life in peace, he had an iron hand forged. Some Jaime Lannister shit. Let me repeat that. This motherfucker had an iron hand prosthetic over 500 years ago. He continued fighting for 40 years. After which he chilled in the castle of Hornburg for his final years. His name was Gotts of the Iron Hand. And the hand itself is still at display. The owner and bartender of a bar once tried to take out an insurance policy on one of their alcoholic customers with one of their friends, in an attempt to make some fast cash. They immediately opened his tab up, hoping he would drink himself to death. That didn't work, so they began spiking his unlimited drinks with antifreeze. That didn't work, So they decided to pump carbon monoxide into his apartment one night. He still wouldn't die. They then beat him savagely and put him in the back of their car to bury him in a rural area. Halfway out there, they heard noises coming from the trunk of the car. He still hadn't died. And when they stopped and got him out, he began walking away under his own power. It took 3 times being hit with a car to finally kill him. That man may be the closest thing we've ever had to a superhero. Edit. Since posting I've been made aware that his name was Michael Malloy. If anyone wants to read further about his story. The last time Liechtenstein went to war was the Austro-Prussian War. The fact that sounds like fiction is that they were forced to send 80 soldiers. And came back with 81. They made a friend in the form of an Austrian liaison officer. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.